Hey there and welcome to my channel. And in this video, we do a little review of everything that you need to know for Unit 3 of the AP United States History curriculum. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. Okay, let's begin with the big picture stuff. The period of 1820-1860s saw the United States grow from a rather small country to a big country. As people headed out west, though, they had to figure out how to travel across the continent. And in 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, connecting the eastern and western United States and facilitating the movement of people and goods across the continent. Instead, the Missouri Compromise was allowed to lapse, meaning that any new territory could decide for itself whether or not to allow slavery. Popular sovereignty, as it was called, became the prevailing method for deciding the issue of slavery in new territories, which meant that Congress couldn't avoid the issue, and the debate over slavery only grew more intense. And they used all kinds of tactics to achieve their goal of ending slavery. In the early years of the party, most Republicans were from the northern states, and the party's main platform was the opposition to slavery. But after the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 18, which allowed for popular sovereignty to determine the issue of slavery in new territories, the Republican Party began attracting members from the South as well. And in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president on an anti-slavery platform, which caused the southern states to secede from the Union, and that came in the form of interchangeable parts, which led to the building of factories and ultimately the building of railroads. Also during this period, there was an incredible amount of innovation, including the telegraph, which facilitated communication across vast distances almost instantaneously. During this period, the Second Great Awakening was in full swing, which was a revival of religious feeling in the United States. And you want me to keep making them? Then subscribe and I shall oblige. I'm out. And that led to all kinds of reform movements, including the utopian communities established by Charles Fourier and others. There was also the American Temperance Society, which was founded in 1826 to try to curb the evils of drinking. There was also the American Colonization Society, which was founded in 1816 to help formerly enslaved people resettle in Africa. And there was a women's rights movement gaining steam with the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848. But we gonna talk about that in Unit 4. And the McCormick Reaper, which made farming more efficient, especially in the vast open spaces of the western United States. Abolitionists published anti-slavery newspapers like The Liberator. They wrote pamphlets and books attacking slavery. They even started the American Anti-Slavery Society in 1833. Plantations relied on enslaved labor to produce cash crops like tobacco, cotton, sugar, and rice. And that reliance on slave labor led to the peculiar institution of slavery in the South. In fact, slavery was so important to the Southern economy that Southerners developed an entire ideology to defend it. And we talked about that in the last video. But perhaps the most effective abolitionist tactic was that of emotional appeals, like the ones found in Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. But while the abolitionist movement gained steam, it also caused Southerners to become more defensive of slavery, and they began arguing that slavery was a necessary evil. And to support their argument, they created the doctrine of pro-slavery, which was based on the idea that Africans were an inferior race, better suited to life as slaves. Like railroads, roads also improved during this period with the construction of the National Road and the development of the Pony Express. Then in 1819, the United States purchased Florida from Spain, resolving a border dispute and putting an end to the First Seminole War. Now, as the Civil War began, the Confederacy was soon joined by 4 additional slave states, which meant that the Republicans were right. The issue of slavery was a major one, and Missouri as a slave state, thus keeping the balance of power between the two sides. One of the biggest innovations during this period was the cotton gin, invented by Eli Whitney in 1793. This invention led to an increase in the production of cotton and the expansion of slavery into new territories. It also led to the specialization of labor, meaning that people began performing a single task over and over again, which made them more efficient. However, this also contributed to a growing gap between skilled and unskilled workers. However, the intense debate over slavery continued, leading to increased. So in order to resolve this issue, a series of laws known as the Compromise of 1850 were passed. The Fugitive Slave Act was part of that compromise, and it actually required citizens to assist in the capture of runaway slaves, and it increased the punishment for those who aided runaway slaves. And that, friends, caused a lot of tension between the North and the South. Sectionalism, remember, is that thing where different regions of the country develop different beliefs and interests, and in this case, the economic and political differences between the North and the South were only exacerbated by the addition of new states. For one thing, people were trying to escape the growing industrialization of the eastern United States, which led to what historians call a frontier mentality. This was a way of life characterized by rugged individualism, self-reliance, and a commitment to freedom, which is kind of ironic considering that these folks were running away from industrialization, which is like the antithesis of rugged individualism. Anyway, as Americans moved west, they encountered various Native American tribes, and generally speaking, things did not go well for those tribes, as the U.S. government forced most of them onto reservations. Trail of Tears, anyone? Next up, in 1845, Texas was admitted to the Union as a slave state, bringing the total number of states to 28. In 1846, the Oregon Territory was claimed all the way to the southern border of Russia. But then in the Oregon Treaty of 1846, Britain and the U.S. agreed to the 49th parallel as the border, giving the U.S. this chunk of what would become the Pacific Northwest. Then in 1848, the Mexican War resulted in the United States acquiring the vast majority of modern-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, via the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. That same year, the United States also acquired a bit more of Texas by defeating the Republic of Texas in a war over disputed territory. And in 1853, the Gadsden Purchase added a bit of southern Arizona and New Mexico to the United States. And by doing all of those things, the United States went from a country that looked like this to one that looks like this. In fact, let's look at this map. We're going from this to this, and in order to get from here to here, we have to talk about some new land. In 1803, the United States purchased the Louisiana Territory from France, doubling the size of the country. But while this is happening, Americans are heading west for all kinds of reasons. Another reason that people headed west was because of the belief in manifest destiny, which was the idea that Americans were destined by God to possess all of the land from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Meanwhile, the Missouri Compromise of 1820 temporarily resolved the issue of slavery by admitting Maine as a free state. The Wilmette Proviso in 1846 was an attempt to ban slavery in any territory acquired from Mexico, but it failed to pass. And then in 1850, California applied for admission as a free state, which would upset the balance of power between slave and free states. Speaking of runaway slaves, another thing that happened during this period was the growth of an abolitionist movement, which was led by both black and white Americans. Meanwhile, the Republican Party was formed in 1854 by anti-slavery activists, and its members were called Republicans. Before we move on, let me just say this. You need to know the sequence of events leading up to the Civil War, like the ones I just outlined for you. Okay, so now let's talk about economics. During this period, manufacturing began to boom in the northern states, and this led to rapid industrialization and urbanization. Now, this technological innovation also led to the need for new energy sources. Now, despite these innovations, the agricultural economy of the South remained largely unchanged. Okay, finally, let's talk about religion. Okay, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 3. And hey, if this video helped you,